City Council to order with the pledge of indivisible, with liberty and justice. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We do have agenda before us. We'll move to consider the approving of that agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening? If not, is there a motion to approve this agenda?
Move to accept. Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim to approve the agenda. Discussion. If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Move to agenda item number 3. Agenda item number 3 is a life-saving award to Marshall Police Officers John Ellis and Alicia Popowski. I'm going to ask Director of Public Safety Rob Yant to come forward, and as well as officers Ellis and Popowski. I'll come around. We have a plaque to present, but I'll ask Rob to kind of explain what the situation is and why they received this award.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The officers had received a report of a man down who appeared to be unresponsive, and they did respond, and through a combination of providing CPR, then as the ambulance arrived, assisted the staff from north in the transport there, and actually went with the ambulance there, and Mr. Mulder survived. He's actually here with us as well. So you want to come up? Or? Sure. So this is the gentleman who received the CPR, and as you can see, he's with us now. And
You guys look different without all those clothes on.
So,
Thank you so much.
So let me present these awards first to Officer Popowski and to Officer Ellis. Thank you. Join me.
picture with everyone, if you
Yeah, we're going to take a little bit of time for this.
just a picture with the officers here. Sorry. Yes.
Everyone ready? And just in case.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.
So we'll proceed with the meeting. Some of you are here just for that item. You're welcome to stay, but we understand if you don't. So the next item that we'll go to is to consider the approval of the minutes of the last meeting that we had. That was on February 27th. The council does have the minutes of that meeting. Any corrections?
Move approval.
Motion by Craig,
Second.
second by Jim to approve as they have been presented. We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 5 is a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the Ziegenhagen addition. We'll have a public hearing on the preliminary plat and then consider the approval of the preliminary plat. So I will call on City Engineer, Director of Public Works, Glenn Olson, to conduct this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Mr. Ziegenhagen is also in the audience concerning a couple of items I want to discuss with you. This preliminary plat went to the Planning Commission last week and was recommended for approval. And since that time, there have been a couple of small things I'll call them, that I don't think really need to go back to the Planning Commission for any other review. I'll tell you what those are. You can see along here, if I can get my... Okay. You can see along here that there are a bunch of lots shown on there that were previously indicated by Burlington Northern Railroad. In accordance with the request of the county recorder's office, those have been removed. They don't need them on there. They're not a recorded document. So instead of showing them on the plat, they requested that they be taken off because they are not recorded by the railroad. Okay. The other issue is right down here in the corner. You can see a little trapezoidal space right there that there was some concern about that little space. Bill had gone through a quiet title action some years ago to clear up title for the area, we'll call it the front of his property along Trunk Highway 59. And there was no adverse comments to it, and then subsequent to that, they said they really did need some sort of state ownership in that little trapezoidal piece. And so there was two proposals given. One, it could be dedicated as public right-of-way by Bill in the plat, or number two, it could be kept as a permanent roadway easement over that triangle. We don't, as a staff, we didn't care which one, but we did talk to Bill about what the differences would be. So in the future, if the building was gone and they wanted to rebuild, the setbacks come from the property line, notwithstanding an easement. So if in fact it was dedicated as public right-of-way, that becomes his new property line, which the setbacks would be from there. If he dedicates a public roadway easement over it, he can't build on it, and he can't build on it anyway because it's in the setback area. So my recommendation was to keep the property and give them an easement over it. I don't care which one it is. It just would be probably in his best interest in the long term. He can keep the building where it is now and in the future. There's nothing adverse about doing that. But I talked to Bill earlier, and he thought the easement would be just fine as well. So those are the two relative changes since the Planning Commission looked at, and I don't believe that it needs to go back to them for another meeting. If Bill would have any questions.
We'll open up as for any public comment as part of this public hearing. Bill, do you have any comments you want to make at this time?
I do not.
Anyone else here want to speak as part of the public hearing? Any member of the council? If not, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Motion by Steve, seconded by David. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Glenn, do you want the action at this time?
Yes, to approve the preliminary plat, and then we will schedule the final plat at our next meeting.
Is there any questions on that recommendation? Because, and then included in that recommendation would be the language about the easement.
Yes.
As well as removing the railroad.
Correct.
I would make a motion to approve with those changes made.
I'll second. Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Any further action on this, Glenn?
No.
Okay. We'll then move to agenda item number 6. Agenda item number 6 is the Marguerite Avenue South Bend Avenue reconstruction project. The first item then will be a public hearing on the improvement on Marguerite and South Bend proposed project. Then following the public hearing, then we will, consider the next step, which would be the resolution that would order an improvement preparation of the plans, as well as the resolution that would send the plans out to bid. So similar to last time, or the last public hearing, I'll ask Glenn Olson to conduct the public hearing. Glenn will have a brief explanation of the project, and then following that, it will open up for anyone that has questions as part of the public hearing or a statement. That's welcome also, either from the audience or from the council. Audience members that wish to speak at that time, we do need to have you use the microphone at the podium, because this is carried over public television live. So, and then also at that time, if you just give your name and the address so the city clerk can record that. So with that, I'll call on Glenn Olson to begin this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I know you're having a little difficulty with that, but I will just start anyway. We had last Thursday a public informational meeting concerning this project. It includes 2 projects, one on South Bend and one on Marguerite, from Camden to Southview. All of the residents were notified of both of the, I suppose I should talk closer, of both of the meetings, both the one last Thursday and the one tonight. And we went over all of the plans for the project, including the scope of work, what was to be done, and what the meeting wasn't. The meeting was not an assessment hearing. It was a discussion of our special assessment processes as well for it. But it is a total reconstruction of the street section, curb and gutter, sidewalks, driveways, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and water main. So it does include all of the reconstruction for that neighborhood. We're just going to, there we go. So if, yeah, just bring it up and, okay, let's see if I can, okay. There's the area that I just discussed. It's those 2 roadways from Camden to Southview. The plans are essentially complete. You can see we go over, we have, this is the removal sheet. It shows everything that's going to be removed on both of the street areas. It also shows what we're going to install on each of the street areas. So the blue is the water and the green is the sewer, and there's also storm sewer installations. I believe they're in red. It's hard to kind of see them. But both of them have the same reconstruction items for them. We are changing the typical section of the roadway somewhat on Marguerite. Right now, there's a great difference between the north curb line and the south curb line, and because of that, and when you try to install a crown section, the section on the top gets flat, and the section on the bottom side gets steep. So that's been removed, and all of the slope of the street will be going from north to south. And then catch basins installed along the south side. There's catch basins there now, but they're not adequate for the work. This is we have separate sheets specifically for ADA crossings. They're very very meticulous on how those crosswalks have to be installed. The landings, the slopes coming into them, the cross slopes of them. So each one of the intersections where we're putting in ADA crosswalks are individually designed so there's no misunderstanding of the contractor of what the required slopes are. Because if you do install them and install them incorrectly, they will come out. So we want to make sure that the contractor knows exactly what to do there. And then we had a discussion of the special assessments, our current procedures, with the understanding if the assessment procedure would change, it would most likely be less than this rather than any greater. But this was a handout that was given to every property owner that attended as well. This is just a summary of them. If you wish to have this summary, we'll get you one, because we have it for the project. Okay, and we have the interest rates, and if you want to pay them off, and it's just kind of a summary of all of our projects. The length of time, we intend to start the project in the spring, and it would be done by this fall, except for we discussed putting the last asphalt lift on next spring. That gives any areas that settle a little bit during the winter time that chance to settle, and then we put the last lift of asphalt or any patching first, and then any last lift of asphalt in the following spring. It makes a lot smoother ride. I think I'll stop there. That's pretty much the project, and any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. We'll open up then if anyone has questions or input as part of the public hearing.
I wanted to make sure that you understood too that this was not an assessment hearing. This is the project improvement hearing.
Thank you.
I'm Doug Lindsley. We own a house on Marguerite. I can't tell you the address because I didn't think of it. But what we're curious about is, like you said, with the assessments. We missed the last meeting, and I guess we should have been there. But we'd just like to have some of this stuff and tell us what it is going to cost us, because we aren't familiar with this. So,
So you want to explain the current policy, what's covered by the various sources, and then what the maximum assessment.
If you could go back to that, I think it's a real good question. That's what really affects the property owners in the end. So let me just read these. Water main and water service line replacements up to and including the curb stop are paid for by MMU. I will also, okay, we'll just go on here. Sanitary sewer main replacements are paid for by the wastewater fund. Storm sewer and catch basin replacements are paid for by the water surface water management utility fund. In saying that, that means you still pay for them, but they're in our water, wastewater, and surface water rates citywide. So none of those things will be assessed to the adjacent property owner. Street replacement costs associated with all of those things that we just mentioned are also paid for by the respective utilities. So if you have a water main and we take a strip 10 feet wide over that they would normally pay if they were doing that project themselves, and we take that, they pay for that. Wastewater pays for the area over the sanitary sewer mains. And surface water pays for the surfacing, everything up above the storm sewer costs. So those are paid for by those funds and not special assessed. The ADA required sidewalk ramps at the intersections are paid for by the city. So the things that you saw there with the truncated domes, those are covered by the city. The remaining street replacement costs, including public sidewalks, are split 50-50 between the property owners and the city. So what's left after those things are taken out of the street are split 50-50 with the property owner. Go on to the next page, please. Okay. The private sanitary sewer connections, including the Y. The Y is what connects your service line to the main. And the service line to the property line, that's typically right behind the sidewalk towards the house, are the responsibility of each property owner attached to the sewer main. So that line coming all the way from your house to the main itself is the property owner's responsibility. And that's what's a little bit different from sewer and water. And the reason that we do that is because you might have Orangeburg sewer services, which is real bad. You might have clay services. You might have cast iron services. And all of those get replaced if, in fact, to the back of the sidewalk. If you've got plastic already, you'll just have a reconnection at the main. We won't be doing that. Now, most of the property owners might not know what they've got. And so we're not sure what it is when we go into the project. So when the contractor is digging and he finds your service line, he'll determine what kind it is and whether or not it's going to be replaced. We will automatically replace it to behind the sidewalk. But we'll also tell you what we're doing so that you can, if you wish, contact another excavator or another plumber to come in and finish it up all the way to your house. You can even discuss it with our contractor, but we will have nothing to do with that section past the sidewalk to the house. If you've had some sewer problems in the past, we strongly suggest that you consider that when this work is being done. But it will be replaced in the right-of-way, and that'll be put on your specials. Okay. The removal and replacement of additional area of the individual driveways are the responsibility of the property owner, as each driveway is different in size and serves only the property involved. Now, that's the current method of assessment. There have been some discussions about changing that or modifying that some, but we just want to tell you what it currently is if it doesn't get changed at all. That's the most that's the biggest item that might be adjusted. But
how far in do they go?
To the back of the sidewalk.
Okay.
So we include the entrance to the street, the piece in the boulevard, and through the sidewalk. And through the sidewalk, we thicken the concrete from 4 inches to 6 inches so that you can drive across it. A lot of times, sidewalks are only poured 4 inches thick. You drive over them and they crack up greatly. So the removal and the replacement of private sidewalks from the curb to the property are the responsibility of the property owner. Along these two projects, there are several locations where people have a private sidewalk kind of that goes from the sidewalk to their car or to their parking space out front. And that's what we do ask is anyone who wants one or anyone who wants theirs replaced, or if anyone wants to get rid of them, we're okay with however they want it because it's your cost. So whether you want them or not, you let us know. We'll accommodate whatever you want to do. Just know that that's yours. The maximum street assessment for the residential properties will be $5,500 for assessment certified in 2018. So that's the street assessment. So if you look at the next line, it says this, and I stressed this at our informational meeting, this maximum does not, I'll only say it twice tonight, include the individual improvements to the sanitary sewer service line, removal of replacement of private driveways, sidewalk walk-ups, or new additional driveway improvements within the city's rights-of-way. We've already had a few property owners come and ask for their driveway to be widened. And of course, even if our procedure would change on what's there now, I would suggest that it wouldn't change for anything you want new and extra. Okay, so that's pretty much the process that we'll use but we haven't determined any dollar amounts. We don't determine those until the project's bid. Because we have estimates. I would not want to send you out assessments based upon our estimates, because we've had awfully good project bids in the last couple of years. And we can't take the low bids for our estimates, because we're normally right in the middle of the bidding on our estimates. Hopefully, they're going to come in a little bit less.
So Doug, there will be then, once the numbers are known, the project is bid, and the contract is let, then there's a separate assessment hearing, and then at that time, those actual numbers would be known.
And we will give you a formal written announcement of the hearing date and time and the proposed amount.
All right. Thank you.
Other questions or input as part of the public hearing? Input from the council? If not, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Motion by David, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. While we're voting, Doug, thank you for asking that question, because that gave Glenn the opportunity to give a thorough explanation of probably questions a lot of people have. So. So that motion passes. The next action then would be consider the resolution that would order the improvements in the preparation of the plans for this reconstruction project.
I move the resolution order improvements in the preparation of plans.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion?
The only thing that I have on this is the same thing I said last time. We're looking at our special assessments, and I just can't support these projects. I understand we got to keep going forward, but I think we need to deal with our special assessments before we keep pushing these forward. And I just can't support either of these resolutions until we deal with our special assessments. It seems like we're quick in getting the street project out there, but we just have not grasped that special assessments. And I think that we need to deal with that in the next 2-3 weeks so we can move forward and it's taken care of. That's clarified and out of the way. So,
Sharon, do you want to comment on the schedule on that? That was kind of worked through at the work session.
We do have a Ways and Means tentatively scheduled for the end of March to review the assessment policy, and I know that Director Olson and Attorney Simpson have reviewed the policy as well, and so we would expect that to come to council in early April for recommendation revisions.
I respect Councilman Lozinski's position, but also say that I think we are a pretty committed council, and I think we can do both of them consecutively.
Any other discussion on the motion?
I would just make the comment that, at our special work session, we did look at special assessments. We looked at sales tax. We looked at other ways of financing these improvements, and I think it was pretty clear that the only viable option is really to continue with special assessments. The special assessment rules need to be tweaked somewhat, improved, and fixed. There were some problems with it, but I believe the only viable option for us right now is to continue with special assessments. The longer we wait to do these projects, construction costs might go up, interest rates might go up. It's time to do these projects. And like I said, I'm not convinced there's any viable option to getting rid of our special assessments. It's worked for many years in the past. We've had some problems lately, but those problems can be fixed. And so, like I said, I think we're going to tweak the special assessment policy, but I think it's in everyone's best interest if we continue to use it.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote on the motion. Motion passes. Then it move to the next action, which is the resolution that would approve the plans and specifications and ordering the advertisement for the bids on this project.
I move the resolution.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David. Discussion? For Glenn, for the audience, maybe you just want to state when, if this passes, when advertisement would be complete and the bids would be expected to be ended up.
It would be at least 2 weeks of public notification, and so I would expect there'll be at least 3 weeks. I don't have a calendar in front of me for our next meeting.
So either the second meeting of April or first meeting of
Yeah.
May.
It would be at least in April. At least in April.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is to consider the award of the bids for a new model 2017 or 2018 72-inch commercial mower with a cab for the Parks Department. With us tonight with the recommendation from the bid that were received is Preston Stensrud from our Parks Department. Preston?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, like I said, is the recommendation to purchase a new commercial mower for the Parks Department. We did receive 3 bids, one from the local implement here in Marshall, one from the implement in Tracy, and one from RDO Equipment in Moorhead. And RDO is the NJPA approved dealer for National Joint Purchase Alliance, which would, if you would just go with them, you could get around the whole bidding process. However, based on our results here, both local implements beat the NJPA pricing, which is pretty typical to what happens. So with that being said, my recommendation would be to approve the proposal B without trade to Lyon County Implement in Tracy. There was $32,000 budgeted in the CIP. Originally it had listed as a replacement, but due to all the added acres we've been mowing, I think we're at the time where it'd be a good point to add a mower to the fleet. So this mower also would have a cab and fits all of our snow removal attachments, so that would give us another piece of equipment for snow removal for bike trails, sidewalks, and stuff like that. So.
Okay. Thank you, Preston. Questions?
With this, since we're not trading a mower in, which we added acreage, I get that. What I would like to see is how much extra maintenance this mower that we're keeping actually costs. Because, as I've said, I think we trade these things in too soon. I like the fact that we're keeping one to use it longer. I don't think we use our equipment long enough. So just something maybe in 6 months or when the mowing season's done, you just do, how much did it cost to keep that mower instead of trading it in? I like the fact that we're using our equipment longer.
Yep, I can keep track of it, especially if it's major, not mower blades.
No,
Yeah.
major.
So, yep.
Because I would like to see us extend all of the life of our stuff longer.
That is
wear it out.
12 years old.
But it still had a $8,000 trade-in value, so
Right.
there's still a lot of value
Yeah.
there.
There is no significant mechanical deficiencies in the mower. It's in good condition as we keep up all of our equipment. So.
Any other questions? Steve?
Preston, does the equipment for winter fit on this one that we already have?
Yep. When we went to the equipment review, that was kind of one discussion. The spec was basically to a John Deere mower because we have 4 attachments, and each attachment's $4,000 to $5,000. So if we would go to something different, now we're switching everything over. So yep, this has all the hydraulic hookups, the arms, everything fits. It's going to be a pull 2 pins, pull the PTO shaft, and you're good to go.
So we don't need to buy any more equipment
Nope.
for that.
Other questions?
I move approval.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 8. Agenda Agenda item number 8 is the consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the screen on the consent agenda. They include consider the approval of the refuse hauler's license for Southwest Sanitation and Waste Management. Consider the approval of a transient merchant license for TNT Fireworks. The calling for a public hearing on a liquor license transfer. Consider the authorization to approve Frontline Plus Inc. Warning Systems Division contract with City of Marshall. Consider the authorization for the acceptance of the HMEP grant for the Southwest Chemical Assessment Team, and to authorize the Director of Public Safety, Police Chief Rob Yant, to administer the grant. And then finally, consider the approval of the bills and the project payments. Is there any item on the consent agenda any member of the council wants removed for purposes of separate discussion?
11.
Other items?
Move to accept the consent agenda as amended by Councilmember Lozinski.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Move then to agenda item number 14, which was agenda item number 11. Jim?
Before you call for a public hearing, I just was curious, are they current? I know that they were changing liquor license, but are they current on their liquor taxes?
Kyle? Kyle Box, City Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Currently, the Ramada that will be transferring liquor license ownerships, or ownership in that. They will be current by the time the liquor license is given, or they do not receive the new liquor license. But they are aware of that. They are currently working on becoming current with their with the necessary requirements.
So who since Ramada's not running it, who's running it now?
It is under new receivership. As of February 21st, a receiver was put into place by the Lyon County Courts.
So whose liquor license are they using now?
The Ramadas, we did get the okay from Liquor Control that they can operate under that liquor license while the transfer is happening.
I guess before we call for the public hearing, I would like to see the liquor license paid for before we call for the public hearing, or have it paid for by that time. So it puts some pressure on them to make sure that that's paid for.
Yep, and they are aware of that. I am working with the consulting firm that is handling the licensing process, and they are aware before we can issue a
Even
license.
before we issue it, I'd like to see it paid for before call the public hearing, but have it paid for before we conduct the public hearing.
Before the hearing is held. That's what you're saying, too. So.
It will, they have until till the next meeting to pay the fee. So it'll be.
Well, in the motion I would make is that it's paid for. We can call the public hearing, but before we have the public hearing, that liquor license is current. That the Ramada is current on their liquor license before we even discuss transferring it.
Yep, that was the instruction I gave them. So that'll happen in 2 weeks, by 2 weeks.
I did make that as a motion.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 15. Agenda item number 15, consider adopting the ordinance that would rezone 100 and 110 North Highway 59 from the I-2 General Industrial District to a B3 General Business District. This actually was also discussed earlier in the earlier action of the public hearing. So this is a follow-up from that action. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have, if you can make it a little smaller, the property owner requested, and that's Mr. Ziegenhagen, requested a rezoning of the area that's included in the preliminary plat that you just took a look at. It's all the property that he owns from on the east side of Trunk Highway 59 going north. It's the storage facilities and a commercial business building as well. And so he requested for a rezoning of his area. When staff reviewed it, we thought it might be a good time to rezone all the way up to Fairview Street. So we brought that proposal to the Planning Commission, and after discussion, they did recommend that we just do it for the applicant. And so that's what you see is a recommendation for approval of the request as submitted by Mr. Ziegenhagen, his property, and we would concur.
So, just to confirm, Glenn, on our second map in our file, we're rezoning only that purple wedge at the bottom.
Correct.
Not the entire.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Glenn? Not, is there a motion?
I guess, what was the reasoning? I guess I didn't catch the reasoning for not doing the whole thing.
The property owners that were there thought that, well, it's okay the way it is now, and when the time comes that we may want to use it for a different purpose, that would be the time we'd come forward. It is another good reason that we're looking at the comprehensive plan. We've had discussion in the past about a strip of land along each of our main highways, like Highway 19, 59, 68, that maybe there should be a ability of business zoning along those strips for retail or that type of use. So it really is something that we should look at in that comp plan, that the council kind of has a direction for these main entrances.
Any other questions? Not, you have the recommendation before you. I would entertain a motion.
Approval of the ordinance to rezone the indicated properties.
Second.
Motion by David, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If there's no discussion, we'll move to a vote.
One comment I'd like to make during the vote, we have had another inquiry about rezoning a piece of property north of this area as well to business to accommodate some business development along 59. But that's not involved with this.
So that motion did pass. So we'll move then to agenda item number 16 is the review of the proposed fire protection agreements for 2018, 2019 with his tonight, perhaps for his last meeting as Fire Chief Mark Clay.
Never know. Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's our yearly time to sign our fire protection contracts with the rural area. Back in 2011, we changed our formula on how we were doing it, so we're 7 years into this process. I think it's working well for us. The townships are supportive of it now. We did tell them it would be in a 10-year plan that we'd implement this over. And if the schedule that I have in 2021 will probably be where we're supposed to be on our fees charging the township area, and then we'll have to discuss what that increase is going to be at that time, if we're going to do a cost of living increase or what. Right now we're at a 15% increase every year up until that 2021. So all the townships are still signing the agreements. We did lose a couple sections of Stanley a couple years ago, but that's about all we've lost. This is still a hot topic within the state of Minnesota. I just talked to the fire chief over in Redwood County. They're having the same issues on where that fee should be. Cottonwood is still at the same rate we are. Linda's still at the same rate we are. Tracy is there. They've had some issues, and so they're going to try to catch back up again. So I think we still need to lead forward, have that partnership with that township. The formula is working for us. There was a question based if we base this on the market values of the land. We do base it on, we get all those numbers from 2017, so it's all current information. The farmland is based on 25% of that value because we're only out there in the fall in a potential fire for during harvest. So we've kind of made it a joint thing to work with them and give them that quality of service. They do not pay for a fire call, just like we do in the city of Marshall. They do pay if we use our rescue van or our ladder out there. So they're getting the same benefits as the city of Marshall taxpayer is under this agreement.
Okay. First off, thank you, Mark, for, this was way back when we started this process. It was taking into account a couple factors. One is being reasonable and fair, but then also recognizing the cost of providing the service, including that equipment. And it took a lot of communication on your part and a lot of trust building on your part, too, with the township officials. And vice versa, the township officials were good to work with,
Yes.
with the city also. And I think the bottom line is everybody appreciates the ability to have the quality service when they need it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Open up for any questions the council has for Mark. David?
Chief, this will seem like a very technical question, I think, but on your table here, you talk about the number of sections that are covered by the respective service agreements with the townships. And we've got two townships, if I'm reading this right, Fairview and Lake Marshall, where there's a fraction of a section.
There is.
An oddball situation.
There is, and some of that has to do with the way it's laid out.
Okay.
It's kind of weird on some of this thing, because even Ghent comes almost up to the backside of the Marshall Airport with the way that it's segregated off in the sections. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and we cover part of Lynn's Township too, so yeah, it's a unique situation.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? If not, you have the
I move approval.
Second.
motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? Now we'll move to a vote. Voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 17.
Mr. Mayor and councilmen, I will be presenting a majority of this agenda item. I do have our Human Resources Director, Sheila Dubbs, here to answer specific questions following my presentation, or if there's specific questions related to the engineering technician proposed changes. So there are three action items before you regarding the Building Inspection Department and Public Works. First, we do have an upcoming retirement for our senior engineering technician, and so it was an opportunity for the Public Works Department and Director Olson to look at his structure in the department, and the proposal is to have the senior engineering technician or specialist report directly to the assistant city engineer. And there was also some modifications to the job descriptions in that particular area, and there was no pay changes for those particular adjustments. Also, what we are proposing is some changes in the Building Inspection Department, and I did write out some notes on this, so I'm going to read it just so I don't miss any of the topics I want to cover. Changes in the Building Inspection Department is being proposed based on the 2015 Building Inspection Department study that was conducted by Springstead, discussions with contractors, the community, council, and staff. Whereas initially it was proposed to have an interim change for a period of time, changes are being proposed to take effect now based on the upcoming construction season and upcoming city projects where staff can be better utilized. The Building Services Department is indeed a regulatory branch of our local government, acting as an agent of the state of Minnesota for enforcement of the Minnesota Building Code, but also to ensure the city's comprehensive plan is fulfilled through local building and zoning ordinances. We are aware of the Building Task Force work in the area of local ordinances and zoning ordinances, and we await further action from the appropriate committees. Based on communication previously mentioned, there is a desire to increase awareness and cooperation between all parties as it relates to compliance in the area of our building code and ordinances. I think the proposed changes that we are proposing for our building inspection department will increase the opportunities for that awareness and cooperation. The proposed changes are to flatten the organizational structure by moving building inspection and planning and zoning departments from Public Works to a new division called Community Planning. Building inspections will now be called Building Services. As recommended by the Springstead study, job assignments are proposed to be realigned to better meet the talents and the strengths of current employees. Therefore, I am proposing that Jason Anderson be assigned the Assistant Engineer / Planning and Zoning Administrator job duties and lead the Community Planning Division. Ray Henriksen be assigned Chief Building Official as per Minnesota statutes, with the main duties not only in enforcement, but also facilitation of complying with codes and ordinances. Thus, a new job title, Building Services Coordinator. Ilya Gutman will take on a larger role with planning and zoning, with job title as Assistant Planning and Zoning Administrator, as well as continue his work in the area of plan review as plans examiner. In addition, the duty of special projects detailed in Ilya's job description will lend well to his support in the future City Hall project and updating of the comprehensive plan. I expect and already have noted that Jason, Ray, and Ilya work as a team with this new change and continue to support the remaining staff in the department. This past week, the building services staff submitted suggestions and supported a mission statement for the community planning division. And I just want to take a moment and read the community planning division mission statement. To protect the public's life, health, and welfare, and improve the quality of life through the adoption, interpretation, education, and enforcement of the Minnesota Building Code and zoning ordinances in a fair, cooperative, and efficient manner. We will advance the overall growth of the community by being a resource to our economic development partners. Through education and cooperation, we will build positive working relationships with the building community and citizens alike. So we hope to promote that mission statement and fulfill it out on our day-to-day tasks. We also foresee the community planning division having a supporting role with economic development, similar to the support conducted daily by our public works division. In addition, the need to increase education and cooperation through communication is strongly desired by all parties. We hope to accomplish this by a proposed quarterly building services newsletter, continued contractor training sessions, and the annual reports to council, investigation and purchase of better permit software, and more opportunities for one-on-one communications that will build relationships leading to trust. And one area we'd like to see increased trust is scheduling of inspections, where it is estimated only 10% currently call for scheduled inspections. That might be a good benchmark to see how we're doing in this particular department. Finally, the public has an important role to play in their own safety and quality of life. We hope to find opportunities to make the public more aware of the need for their support and cooperation. One area that we've heard about recently is the requirement of smoke and fire alarm inspections following certain permit applications. And I've had discussions with Fire Chief Clath on the needs in this area, and he has stated that his fire department and the incoming fire chief will assist in the education in this area come this fall, where individual letters will be sent to all residents explaining this important life safety need. And I believe the fire department has a greater role to play in other areas in the building services department as we go along in the future of this division, and hope we can plan for that in the years to come. There are certainly other internal processes and procedures that we will need to hone and improve upon, and hope that we can rely on contractors for honest feedback, and would welcome an annual convening of contractors to get their input. And I'm sure the task force doesn't want to stay in place, but we'd welcome potentially just having a meeting with them at least annually to get their feedback. Finally, I just want to thank the staff for working with me on this proposed structure change for our building services department, and partly relates to Public Works. I know that these have been really tough discussions, but the staff have always been honest and respectful, and that's been much appreciated. So just wanted to detail the statements there, and Mr. Mayor, I've asked the 3 recommended action items be considered, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, and thank you, Sharon, and let me start by thanking you for your leadership on this. Certainly the discussion on this topic, as you mentioned with the Springstead study previously, preceded your coming as city administrator, but since you have arrived and it's you have provided leadership, you've worked with the staff, worked with the task force, received a lot of input, and then made a sound recommendation based on all of those discussions and all those inputs, put us in a position to provide some opportunity to move forward on this issue. So thank you, Sharon. Open up for any other questions or discussion.
I have a few comments and questions. You mentioned a mission statement. Whether or not we change the organizational structure of the inspection department and the community department, planning department, can't we make some of those changes even if we don't change the organizational structure? Aren't a number of things you talked about possible within the existing organizational structure?
I think it's necessary to change the job assignments to meet the mission.
Exactly what did the Springstead study recommend that should be done in plain, concise language? What was their recommendation as to how things could be improved?
They recommended mission statement, goals and objectives, a realignment of job duties. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me right now. Those are some of the main points in the Springstead study.
With regard to the organization chart, who makes the decisions as to how the organization chart looks? Is it the city administrator or the city council?
The city council, by adopting these recommendations, would be approving the change in the organizational structure chart.
We don't actually vote on the organizational chart?
You could if you wanted to do a separate motion on it.
But I mean, you're not expecting a vote on the organizational chart itself?
I was considering that if the 3 recommended action items were approved, the organizational structure chart would change with that.
With regard to these recommended changes, have you discussed this with all of the affected staff members and gotten input from them?
Yes.
Every one of them?
Yes.
Okay. At the present time, who is the current zoning administrator?
Public Works Director Glenn Olson.
Okay, and the assistant zoning administrator?
I don't know if we technically have an assistant zoning administrator, although Ilya and Jason both play a vital role in that area.
So that's a new position in a sense. Okay. It's my understanding then that a number of the job responsibilities of the current Public Works Director, City Engineer, will now be taken over by other individuals. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that?
It's my understanding that some of the duties and responsibilities of the current Public Works Director, City Engineer, will be taken over and done by other individuals. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there any plans then to reduce the salary of the Public Works Director, City Engineer, since he'll be doing fewer duties than he did before?
We did look at the job description for the Public Works Director, and what we found is that the entire job description needs to be updated, not just a section on planning and zoning. It's pretty basic and limited as far as detail, and we would need to take some additional time to update his job description.
Wouldn't it be a good thing to do that now, since all the other job descriptions are being changed and the points are awarded? I mean, you did change points and job description for a number of other individuals. Wouldn't it make sense to do the Public Works Director, City Engineer job description at the same time?
It would make sense, except for I didn't want to delay these action items.
I noticed that the Assistant City Engineer basically serves two different areas. And he works under Public Works, I assume, because that's engineering. And he also supervises people under community planning. So he has two different hats here, two different groups of individuals he's supervising. And is there any concern as to how he would allocate his time between those two different responsibilities?
He currently has his hands in both departments now. He's the Assistant City Engineer, and he currently supervises the building inspection staff. So I think he definitely is taking on a larger role in terms of planning and zoning. But I think a majority of his day-to-day task and time allocation would remain the same.
Under the proposed organizational chart, the Assistant City Engineer will have two bosses then.
Correct.
You're one boss, and the City Engineer is his other boss then. So he's reporting two different places. Is there going to be any conflict or problems with that? The fact that he has two different bosses he's working under?
No, I don't foresee any problems with that, because I think all of our division directors work as a team, and I don't see that changing with the organizational structure chart.
On November 16th, Sharon Hansen started work as City Administrator for the City of Marshall. Less than a month later, at the December 12th Council meeting, the City Administrator informed the Council that she'd be taking over the supervision of the Building Inspection Department for an interim period, 9 months, starting January 1st. At that meeting, I indicated that I was not in favor of this transition. There were a number of reasons why I opposed her actions. First of all, I did not think it wise for her to make such a change in the organizational structure of our city, considering the fact that the City Administrator had spent less than 1 month on the job. Second, I felt that the City Administrator was bowing to political pressures to get something done. Third, I thought she was sending the wrong message to our community. And fourth, I felt that certain city employees were not being treated fairly. Tonight, the City Council is being asked by the City Administrator to approve major changes in the organizational structure of city government. As before, I strongly believe that the City Administrator is bowing to political pressures. Certain powerful and influential members of our community want these changes to occur. These political pressures are being exerted not only on the City Administrator, they are also being directed at members of the City Council. As I indicated before, I believe that this is too soon for the City Administrator to be making major changes to the organizational structure of city government. She's fairly new to her job, and I always think it wise for a new person to a job to wait a certain period of time in order to learn their job and gain experience before they start proposing major changes. I know in our church we usually suggest to the minister that their first year they not make major changes in our church. You know, they need to get the feel for the lay of the land and see how things work before they start proposing major changes. It's also my opinion that these proposed changes are a result of personality differences between various city employees. The question tonight is whether the City Council will bow to political pressures and approve these proposed changes. I may be naive, but I believe that every citizen in our community should have an equal voice, that the views and opinions of the average citizen are as important as those of individuals who are powerful and influential. There will be an election this fall, Some council members may be concerned with regard to how this issue may affect their chances to be reelected. Various members of our community have made threatening remarks regarding changing the composition of the city council if matters are not handled in a certain manner. One person even made such remarks at a city council meeting. It's obvious to me that strong political pressures are behind recommendations that are being proposed tonight. It seems curious to me that these changes to the organizational structure of the Building Inspection Department are being proposed one day before the Planning Commission is being asked to consider recommendations from the Community Task Force. I just found out about these proposed organizational changes this weekend. This issue of changes in the organizational structure does not need to be addressed tonight. I believe it would be prudent for us to wait until we've had an opportunity to hear and consider the recommendations of the Community Task Force before we consider this matter. It is my opinion that the thoughtful, wise, and prudent thing for the council to do is to delay action until we've had more time to study and analyze these proposed changes. These are major changes and are worthy of thoughtful and careful consideration. As members of the City Council, we should not be rubber stamps. That is to say, we were not elected to give automatic approval to whatever is put before us by someone else without giving it thorough study and proper consideration. As elected officials, we should not be putting our finger in the air to see which way the political winds are blowing. Instead, it's our job to study and give careful consideration to issues and then vote our conscience. Certainly, improvements can be made to any department of the city. In life, nothing is perfect. Improvements can always be made in everything we do, and the city administration is no exception to that rule. But at this time, I'm not convinced that these are the right changes to make at this particular time. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. I certainly respect your opinion, and everyone has. The good thing about this council is that there is respect among all. The one clarification, though, the recommendation from the task force that's going to the Planning Commission, it relates to the various ordinances and zoning. The role of the Planning Commission is not to make HR, human resources recommendation. That's really what is before us this evening, is the wage schedule as well as the various appointments, and that's an HR decision. So, which is the council's responsibility, and as I stated earlier, I commend City Administrator Hansen for making the recommendations, but the decision is not hers. The decision is the council. John?
I just say that this matter was brought before the Personnel Committee, and we did discuss this quite a bit. My own opinion on this is that we are really making changes due to really growth in the city, and as much as anything else, and certainly not, in my opinion, at least for me, succumbing to any kind of pressure by anyone else. This is a matter that we have a complex system with building codes. We have a person in the Public Works that is doing a lot of work, has a lot of things reporting to him, and has got a pretty heavy load. And this is just making matters, in my mind, more for him in keeping the zoning. So we're now separating some of that out, divvying up some of that workload, and really getting ourselves aligned better for the next several years ahead. And say that's my opinion. Others from the Personnel Committee can certainly jump in as well. But yeah, we did discuss this in quite some detail, and that's my opinion on it. This is a process of improvement, and I think we're really heading in that direction. So,
thank you, John. Other input? Jim?
And I respect your opinion, Glenn. I believe this is something that has been in the works for quite a while. I mean, years. And I think it's repositioning people where they can serve the community better. I mean, it's we're putting people in where we can make the community a better place. And I don't think it's, saying Sharon's not experienced isn't fair to her. She's had, 18 years of experience as an administrator in Pipestone County. So to say that she's not experienced is not fair to our new city administrator. I mean, I just want to put that out there. And this is something that we discussed. We've been discussing since I've been on the council, and it was something that has been discussed. And repositioning people into positions where they fit better is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It makes people thrive in their jobs.
The other thing I would add to that, Jim, unless you have more to say, is this type of organizational structure is actually quite common in cities our size or even larger, where public works engineering is its own department and the planning and zoning and building administration is separate from that.
Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to go on and state also as part of the Personnel Committee, we did take a long, hard look at this, asked a lot of questions, looked at the pros and cons, and again, like John said and like Jim said, this really, to me, is looking at span of control, the load that's on each individual, the chain of command, the order to say that any one of our individuals can't have two different programs that they take advice and leadership from is really moot and actually is not at all accurate, because now if you want to look at the multiplicity in the organization, I think it's pretty significant. This to me puts it in a lot better package, and Sharon didn't do this in a vacuum. There was a lot of people that did an input in this, and I think that meeting was over an hour, if I remember right, on the Personnel Committee. We spent a substantial amount of time looking at this, so I beg to differ, Mr. Barracola, that this was done in a vacuum. It certainly wasn't.
I didn't say it was done in a vacuum.
You implied that, sir.
I didn't say that at all, and I didn't imply that. I said, I think we need to study it further, all of us, not just certain people on the Personnel Committee, but all of us need to study this issue because we're all going to vote on it. And when I was talking about experience, you're kind of putting words in my mouth. I'm not saying she doesn't have experience. She has experience in different positions. When I'm talking about experience, I'm talking about experience in our city government, knowing the employees, knowing what works. I'm not talking about her past experience and other things she's done. Like I said, when I use the term experience, I say, and even with ministers, whatever, they have experience when they come to our church, but they don't know the composition of our church, what works and doesn't work. They don't know the personality of people, and you get that through experience, through working with people. And so I was not trying to denigrate her experience at all. I'm just saying anybody in a new job should take some time to get the lay of the land before they make major decisions that affect a lot of people and are long-lasting. That's what I was saying.
Other input? Steve?
So, Mr. Mayor, I too went on the Personnel Committee, and we had discussed this a lot. We looked at the pros and cons. One of the things that I personally believe is that we have, with certain changes and retirements with not only this department but other departments, the opportunity to realign things to a better way. Things have been going on in Marshall for a long time, certainly long before I was elected to come onto this council. And I think that what City Administrator Hansen is doing is, like my colleague to the left of me here said, it's in alignment with what needs to be done to help the city grow and move forward. So I think this is a good thing.
Any other input?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the amended 2018 wage schedule as presented.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
I would just, again, like to reiterate the fact that certainly improvements can be made in any government, any department, any individual, and I'm not against making improvements where they're needed. And certainly a number of those improvements can be made without changing the organizational structure. I just want to make sure we do it in a deliberate manner, and I want to make sure we do it because we feel it's the right thing to do, not because we feel like there's a lot of political pressure to get something done. And I do feel that there's been political pressure put on different individuals to get something done here. And, I am concerned when the city administrator takes action when she's in a job in less than a month and changes things as far as the organizational structure. Like I said, I think it's prudent to wait some time, get a feel for the lay of the land before you start proposing major changes.
Other discussion?
I do, because when I hear political pressure, I take offense to that. As somebody who's out in the community on a daily basis, this is something that is talked about in our community. When I knocked on doors to get elected, I bet 70% of the people said we need to do something. So I take huge offense when you say we're following the political pressure. This is something that the community, that our citizens want. The citizens are the city of Marshall, plain and simple. One person, one group, our council, is not larger than the citizens of the city of Marshall. Get out into the community and talk to your citizens, and you would hear that.
And I think another point on that, Jim, and thank you, that was very, very nicely said. Sharon didn't do this on her own. Sharon was directed by the council. I believe it was a 6-1 vote to move forward on this effort. So I just want to say that she didn't do it on her own. She had the support of council.
The other thing that I would add on, and it's been respectful discussion to this point, I would just add that, with Sharon Hansen being joining the organization of City of Marshall in November, you are correct, Glenn, in that she has hit the ground running. She did not have a honeymoon period. There's issues that at her very first meeting she had to address, and this is a community that, there's a lot of things going on. We didn't have the luxury of, having Sharon have a period of inactivity, and she certainly has not.
Mr. Mayor, the other thing that I would like to say is that my leadership philosophy on this council is that we don't micromanage. We hired an administrator to administrate. That's the job. We are the 10,000-foot strategic planning. Here's where we want to go. We hired Sharon to take us there, period. If we want to micromanage, then I don't want to be on this council. It's not a micromanaging council. So,
any other discussion on the motion?
I just want to add, I don't take any comments here personally. I don't think about it at all. And I just want to say that specifically to Glenn, too, because I don't think you're saying these statements for a personal reason. I think you're looking at the organization, and you're trying to, do what you think is best. So I appreciate that. And then the other item, I'll just say, it's really hard for me to cave to political pressure because I've been here such a short period of time, and I don't know a number of the individuals who came forward at that first meeting. I don't know who they are. I haven't met them, haven't talked to them. I have talked to a lot of community members and contractors, similar to what Jim has said. And then, what I get a sense of the direction that the council wants to go. It's not always unanimous, but I try to count to 4 and move on from there. So that's why we moved in this direction too. Besides all the other things I mentioned, it's not one against the other. It was just a sense that this is the direction the council wanted to go.
Thank you, Sharon. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote on the motion. Motion does pass. The second action then would be the council would consider the approval of the designation and appointment of Ray Hendrickson as the building official for the city.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. And then the third action would be consider the designation and appointment of Jason Anderson as the zoning administrator for the city.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. The motion passes. Thank you for everyone who has been involved and will continue to be involved in this discussion and moving forward. We'll move then to agenda item number 18. Agenda item number 18, consider the corridors of commerce request for support. David, do you want to start with this or Sharon? Are you?
Sharon, why don't you?
We did receive a request from Minnesota Department of Transportation regarding their Corridors of Commerce program. This is a legislature-directed program in terms of ranking the projects put forth. They had an open comment period of particular projects, and for any of the projects that touched a city or were within a city, they contacted the individual cities and asked whether or not the city wanted to provide support. The resolution that you have before you notes several corridors of commerce projects, not just one or two. I think I'll leave this comments to Councilman Sturrock, the mayor, and our Public Works Director. There was lengthy discussion on the process itself and the resolution to support these projects. But essentially it supports the merit of the corridors of commerce. With the two interchanges that were listed in the resolution, we're all well aware of the safety portion of those two potential projects and hopefully reducing our crashes and serious injuries that we did have at those two interchanges. So that is just a brief background on it, and I will defer this to Councilman Sturrock for further comments.
Before David makes his comments, I would just add one thing. The one criteria for eligible roadways to be eligible for investment by the state through the Corridors of Commerce project is that they need to be designated as an interregional corridor. So the only highway that we have going through the city of Marshall that is an interregional corridor designation is Highway 23. Others in this area that are designated would include Highway 14 from the city of New Ulm east, not west, Highway 212 from, I believe, Granite Falls east. That's why, some may look at, what about Highway 59, or what about Highway 19, or what about Highway 68? They are not eligible for corridors of commerce investment in our area. It's only Highway 23. So as Sharon has said, there's been a number of proposed projects that have been submitted, including a couple or a project or so that was submitted by the Marshall Area Transportation Group, which Councilmember Sturrock also serves as a chairperson of. David? Chair.
Just a word about the specific projects. The Marshall Area Transportation Group was the requestor of record for the passing lanes. You see the third item of the four it's coming up there on the screen now. Pipestone to Wilmer passing lanes request. We view this as an extension, really a completion of the passing lanes project that was done in 2017. They made a tremendous difference in the speed flow, the safety, movement of freight, connectivity on 23, but there are still some gaps, and hopefully 3 more sets of passing lanes would really get us to where I think many of us think Highway 23 needs to be. So that was the spirit of that request. The fourth item on your table, 4-lane segments between New London and Richmond, those two gaps of about 7.5 miles each, which have been a bugbear for anyone who travels north on Highway 23 toward St. Cloud or beyond. In the last year, a Wilmer-based group, a Highway 23 coalition, has become very active, raised a good deal of money and community support. The MATG is a member of that organization. We fully support their chief objective, which is the completion of those two portions, which are currently 2-lane. Once done, there would be a continuous 4-lane passage from Wilmer to St. Cloud. The other two items came as, I'll say, surprises to us. These were nominated by other individuals who studied with and are familiar with highway safety issues in our region. They did not initiate with us. They both specifically called for construction of interchanges on Highway 23 within the Marshall city limits at the intersection of Highway 59, that should be US 59 I see, and State Highway 19. And we were told by MnDOT that those projects had emerged. The scoring process, to back up a bit, the legislature directed MnDOT last year to come up with a objective scoring basis by which all corridors of commerce requests would be evaluated. There were 7 criteria that the legislature specified. MnDOT then developed a 100-point model or spectrum for each of those 7 items, so 700 points possible for any given request. They have evaluated, done the numerical analysis for all or most of the projects, and discovered that those 2 interchange proposals were the highest ranking so far of any project proposed in District 8 and among the very highest in the state, and specifically because of what they offered in terms of safety improvements and maintenance of speed on Highway 23 as it is in a regional corridor. On that basis, we were encouraged to include these 2 projects, which are purely a concept at this point. The others are somewhat more developed in this resolution. And the reason we're being asked to do a resolution, but Lyon County as well, and the Southwest Regional Development Commission, in fact, you have their letter. They've already acted. That's in your packet. It's one of the attachments. Because one of the scoring components is community or regional support. And so these acts of support are needed to ensure the full possible points for that. I'll pause there.
Thank you, David. And I think and you alluded to this, but it's important to note that, it's the projects, whether they're buildable or feasible or affordable, that has not been evaluated, and that's not the request of the city in the resolution for support. That will be a later action, and of course that will be Department of Transportation that will do that part of the evaluation, and that also then gets incorporated into this matrix that ends up with the final scoring that ultimately will make the recommendation. Corridors for Commerce was authorized by the legislature for $400 million over the next 4 years. So it's a 4-year project, $100 million a year. Okay. Any other questions, input?
I have a couple questions here. I notice it says all cities and counties which would be touched by the suggested project need to have a resolution in support of it in order to receive the 45 points. Does that mean that that when you pass a resolution, you have to support all of the proposed changes, or only those that affect you, or what's the exact wording of the resolution supposed to be?
My immediate concern when I read that, Glenn, was that if you were proposing, for example, a passing lanes request, passing lanes to be located somewhere between Pipestone and Wilmer, that every individual city had to support it, and the answer is no. On the pretty good bet that any passing lane structure be located out in open areas between respective cities, that they only needed the support from the respective counties and then the Regional Development Commission. This resolution talks about we're asked, let me say it this way. Lots of resolutions are being passed by cities and counties that will be talking about projects that are immediately within their boundaries and will also offer endorsements for proposed projects that don't fall within their boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't affect the point scoring. It's just a statement of priority and spirit. So that's why you have all 4 items there.
Well, that was my concern, because we only list 4 items of all the items that are there. And if you only list part of it, does that disqualify you for the 45 points, or do you have to support all of it? Or I'm just wording it as far as the wording of the resolution, what it's supposed to say.
No, there's no snag or trap there. This is the form that would satisfy the request.
Okay. The other question I have is with regard to what affects the city of Marshall, and that's Highway 23 and 59. And the 2 items are the Highway 23-19 and the Highway 23 and Highway 59. And it seems to say that we would, is it saying that we get rid of the signals and replace it with kind of a a different turn, and exactly what turn would replace it? Something like what they have in Worthington?
It would be identified by the type of interchange project that best fits the intersection. Signals would be removed, and new signals would most likely be installed at the end of the off-ramps coming onto the project. If you look at Brookings or Watertown or...
It's an overpass.
It's an overpass,
Yeah.
okay. It's not like a turn or anything like that. It's going to be an overpass.
It's an
okay.
overpass.
Other questions?
And just in looking at that, and I don't have a problem with us supporting the passing lanes or even the 4-lane segments in New London and Richmond. I travel a lot to St. Cloud, both for work and for my hobby of driving tractor trailer. And I'm telling you, the corridors of commerce, those passing lanes, and, I went to Chaska yesterday afternoon with a semi and back, and I went up 19 up and 212 and 23 back, and 212 and 23 is a lot easier on my nerves just because of how traffic flows. So it makes a huge difference.
If it's appropriate at this point, I'll move the approval of this resolution with Kyle, one correction. My mistake initially, that it should be U.S. Highway 59. So if we could catch that.
Motion by David, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Steve. Discussion?
Just one point. The reason I didn't think it was an overpass is because right next to it there's one that says an overpass, and ours says an interchange, so I didn't know if that was a difference or not. So thanks for clarifying that.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. This time I'll call for a 5-minute recess. At this point, I will reconvene the meeting. We are on agenda item number 12. This is the Saratoga Street Reconstruction Project, and the action would be to consider.
It's actually item 19.
I meant 19. Thank you for correcting me, Glenn. So this still the same agenda item, the resolution, receiving the report and calling for the public hearing on the improvement. Glenn, anything? Just calling for the hearing.
Yes, and we've had the discussions. The public informational meeting has been held. We've met individually with property owners, major property owners along the project, and would just recommend approval of the item.
Questions?
I move the resolution.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David. Discussion? Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 20. Agenda item number 20 is calling for a public hearing. Again, that would be the action on the tax increment financing housing district 5-1 and project area 5. With us tonight are representing Economic Development Authority, Tara Onken, and Cal Brink.
Yep. Good evening, and thanks, Mayor and Council, for allowing us to present tonight. Just a quick, this is strictly just a call for public hearing, at which time we would do a much thorough presentation. But the intention tonight would be to give you kind of an idea of a project that we've been working with since about October, early November. So we've had a lot of meetings with this potential developer, and Tara's going to give you the highlights and kind of what the project looks like. It's a great opportunity for Marshall. We'll kind of touch on that on the last slide, but tonight is, again, just to give you an idea before we call for the public hearing and ask you to call for the public hearing.
Thank you. So I'll just start off with, to follow up with Cal, how did we get here? What housing is a huge piece of the economic development puzzle, so we often field inquiries, and that is one of the things that we work on to make sure that we have ample housing for our workforce, for our businesses in the area. So one thing that we looked at was our Marshall housing study that was completed a couple years ago, and our housing study that the City Council, they probably paid for it. The items mentioned: need for more contemporary market rate building, covered parking, community room, secured entry, and the need for a public-private partnership. I don't want to read that whole paragraph, but if you look at the last sentence, for a newer contemporary building to become a reality, keeping the maximum rents to those recommended, so it's at a rate that the Marshall area market would bear, there may need to be a public-private partnership to reduce development costs. So that kind of is a preface to what we'll be discussing next. The problem. One of the things is that we need to keep in mind, or that maybe many of you know, is housing in greater Minnesota is just tough. It's a problem not unique to Marshall, but the different ways that local communities can approach it can be unique. Finances, they just plain do not work for private developers to build apartment houses and make a profit. Almost all of the housing that has been developed with a federal subsidy, and that quote in particular is making reference to the tax credit program, but now with different legislative changes, it almost takes the tax credit program out of play, or it makes it significantly more difficult, and it's so up and down. I know, John, you have some background with Minnesota housing and have been in on some of those discussions, so you can help explain that too if people have questions. The other thing is Governor Dayton created a housing task force because there is a serious shortage of affordable housing in Minnesota, and he called it a persistent crisis. So if anybody wants to read the full articles, the links are there, and I can certainly send them to you. But again, just reiterating, this is not a problem that is unique to Marshall, but it's all of greater Minnesota. So the solution, we are hoping that a development project like this one from Samuel Herzog can be part of the solution for Marshall and the surrounding area to help meet the housing need and demand that we have. So with the solution, where might we put it? The acreage or the parcel that the developer has keyed in on is our Parkway 3 development, which is adjacent to our Parkway 2 development, the single-family homes. So vacant site, pretty easy from what we've discussed for that to be developed. Now the developer is looking at more or less 9 acres, depending upon some variables that we would work through with him. So that would more than likely be the south 9 acres that he would want to purchase and then develop. He did share with us some conceptual site drawings, and actually in our conversations with him, he brought forth a number of drawings and site plans or site elevations, and flip the page. That one really wouldn't work in Marshall. This one really wouldn't work in Marshall. But what he's came up with is something that's really appealing, that really meets our needs and fits our community. So what he's proposing to do is, on the 9 acres, he would like to build 3 36-unit buildings with 2 20-unit garage stalls. The total site development would contain roughly 212 parking spaces. Over here, you'll see this is a playground area, a community park playground area for the tenants as a added benefit, and then also a lot of green space. And these, are trees. They want to develop it and really make it a nice, welcoming area for tenants. Here are some interior photos of previous projects that this developer has built. He's currently building 5 developments in 4 different communities, which I have them listed on a later slide. But this is one of them that he just finished. And as you can see, all of the units are fully furnished with stainless steel appliances, and they also include washer and dryers in every unit, which is a huge benefit, especially for families that you don't want to run down the hall and leave your baby or kid in the apartment. So it could be looked at favorably for that. And this would be a unit mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So what sets this project apart? They are looking at a number of different items, including the stainless steel appliances, secured entry, washers and dryers, but then they also have been discussing that this is not like a cookie cutter, bare bones, new build. This has a little bit more of contemporary finishes, a little bit, I don't want to say higher end, but a step up or a grade up as far as materials go. And as I mentioned a little bit before, the project that they have proposed here for Marshall was custom designed for Marshall. We worked with them, fielded some of their questions, but they visited our community. They've talked with different people in the area, and they're not building the same building in Fergus Falls or Alexandria. They really looked at our community and took our demographics and information into account, because when they, like I said, when they came, they said, we want to build this. We said, that's not quite the best fit. So we really think that what they have proposed here is a really good fit for our community. A community room is also, I just want to touch on that real quick, a huge benefit for people that, if it's built, that would be one thing that they would build for the tenants, but also for community use as a community room for the public. So the project details and the request. All in, total development cost on all 3 buildings complete is an estimated right around $11 million, a little bit over $11 million. And that would be directly invested right into the city of Marshall. The project is 108 units total. Now, if the project utilizes tax increment financing, which the project won't happen without it, but that's why we want to get a public hearing called so we can discuss that piece a little bit further. But if the project utilizes tax increment financing, 80% of the units would be at that market rate, whatever the market would bear. But then the remaining 20% would be rented or earmarked for persons with incomes no greater than 50% of the area median income. So some of those units would be subsidized to accommodate for lower income. So really this project has the opportunity to meet a lot of the demographics that were mentioned in our housing study. So what the actual request is that the city of Marshall, tonight we're asking for the public hearing to discussed this, but the request would be that we would issue a TIF note up to $2,070,000 to reimburse developer for the TIF eligible expenses. Now I know that seems like a sticker shock, or $2 million on a private development project, but one thing that we would like to keep in mind is that these are only TIF eligible costs. So if for some reason they don't produce enough TIF eligible expenses as far as public infrastructure, site improvements, then they don't get that full amount. It's completely based upon the TIF eligible expenses. And this is all private, so we would help them develop some of that infrastructure, but it's held private, so the ongoing care and maintenance for the parking lot and all of that stuff would remain with the developer, which is a significant benefit to the city. So one thing to note with TIF financing, the way that they do it now compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, we call it a pay-go TIF, so you pay as you go. So if the developer does not create the increment that they're being taxed at now versus when the increment is created when they build, if they don't produce that increment, if they don't build or carry out what they say they're going to do, then they get nothing. So really it's in the developer's best interest to build and to create that tax increment so they get this back to help with their development. So really it's very minimal risk to the city, and the developer carries most of the risk, which is good because then they have the monkey on their back to perform on what they say they're going to do. So next, please. Couple points on why might this be the right project. It meets the criteria as stated in our housing study. It checks almost all of the boxes, and while it won't completely fill the need, this is a huge opportunity where we can really put a dent in what our projections show for the next upcoming years. Again, TIF doesn't come without risk, but the risk is very minimal compared to what the reward is. An $11 million investment in the city of Marshall, that investment doesn't happen by accident. They looked at Marshall as a community and they brought this project forward and did a lot of their homework before they are making this request. It's minimal upfront infrastructure cost to the city of Marshall. Their funding is secured, which is another thing. Sometimes people might come forward with a request to utilize TIF or other incentives, but it's contingent upon a fundraising period or trying to gather stakeholders. In this unique case, their funding is already secured, so that is a huge hurdle that we're already over already. So that's also a plus. And then the private development, just touching on that again, minimal cost to the city, so as far as snow removal, ongoing maintenance, and upkeep, that falls out of our hands, which is nice. The one thing that I would like to talk about is Glenn, we talked in our meeting that if the city were to keep this land and develop it for, residential housing development, this would be money that we would have to put in anyways for streets, for lights, for sidewalk, curb and gutter. And I think when we talked, Glenn, maybe you can, share, but when we discussed, it's probably going to be far greater than $2 million that the city was going to develop it. So it depends on how you look at it. You can look at it many different ways, but by helping promote private development, we're actually saving money in the long run if we don't have to develop it ourselves. Mm-hmm. They specialize in outstate Minnesota projects, so 5 projects underway in 4 communities. I've seen some of the projects that they've worked on in those other communities, and they're nice. They're very welcoming, inviting, and it would be a place that I would want to live, so I know other people would want to live there too. With a kind of a final note, TIF is not new for the city of Marshall. It's not new. It's a great tool in the economic development toolbox when it's used correctly. I really feel, and I know that our team would say the same, that this project seems to be the perfect scenario for TIF, tax increment financing, and it only uses incremental tax dollars. We're not giving up something that we already have. We're just basically delaying gratification to make sure that a project like this can get done in our community. So with that, I'll turn it over to some questions.
Thank you, Tara.
So that last page she went through was the one that I referenced I was going to go through.
Oh, sorry.
Supposed to
Well, Terry, you did very good.
You'll just take a discount this month.
I will just make a couple of real quick comments that I thought, and she touched on them briefly. There was a lot of conversation on, is it a project that's worthy for Marshall? And as he showed us the first one, we literally said, not nice enough. He showed us the second one, not nice enough. Showed us the third one, not nice enough. Showed us this one, and we thought, we're close. I mean, we can probably make that one work. The other piece is there's a lot of value in the fact that in this particular case, we only give him TIF eligible expenses. So if it's $2,070,000, it's $2,070,000. If streets and parking lots and infrastructure only come to $1.8 million, you only give $1.8 million. In our case, the benefit to us on this one, he's going to do all of that for all three buildings right up front. So that developer will have $2 million into the project. He's going to do all three buildings. He has to do all three buildings, or the tax increment won't cover it. So that's a real benefit to us. And Glenn didn't say a number, but this is a huge deal for a private developer to put in their own streets, their own infrastructure, their own parking, their own entrances, their own sidewalks, everything that the city would have done in any other development had we developed that. So I think we've got to think a little bit beyond. We're not really giving up $2 million, even though it's increment. We're not spending $2 million either. So we think it's a great project. Again, tonight is just really, you'll have a much more thorough of the details of stuff at our next meeting when the public hearing takes place, so that the public can also hear some of those things, because there are neighbors across the street. And this will be a project that, the other part that Tara didn't touch on, this can happen pretty quickly. I mean, this is a people moving in 2018 project. I mean, not one that a lot of stuff has to happen.
Okay, thank you, Cal and Tara. And again, you know, probably there's numerous questions, but the time for that really is at the public hearing. The action tonight is a call for the public hearing.
Just make a comment that this has been discussed a number of times in EDA, and just so make it as well known, this is not something I would say specific to this developer. This is something that was available and is available to other developers that have an interest in doing it. It does come with some strings attached, and that is the affordable housing piece, which quite often developers are not willing to tackle. That gets to be more of a challenge. But part of getting the TIF is that they do have to have a section of the homes that is affordable housing.
So you have to keep in mind the reason the TIF is needed. You do a pro forma, and you've got an apartment that should rent for $875, and you have to rent it for $220 because that person is income eligible. It takes all of that profitability or potential, and we need that. I mean, that's one of the pieces our housing study said. So I was against TIF 100% until it became some income eligible project where it will satisfy some of the needs of the people that can't afford $800 and have families, and we need that in Marshall. So.
I'll make a motion for the call of the public meeting.
Second. Motion by Jim, seconded by Steve, to call for a public hearing on this project.
Thank you.
Discussion on the motion.
Are we not supposed to ask questions?
Ask questions. That's what discussion on the motion is now.
Right. Well, it sounded like we were supposed to hold the questions until the next hearing.
Well, and I did say that because that's really the purpose of the public hearing, but certainly glad if you have questions.
Okay. I guess the concern I have is it seems that we have this mindset that the only way we can have decent, affordable housing if the government is involved. It seems we have the mindset that we can only have businesses grow and expand if government's involved. And when did we become so dependent on government that the success in our life depends on government? I mean, it used to be people were more independent, didn't rely on government so much, and now it's like if you don't rely on government, it's not going to get done. And this is a case, again, of government involved in housing. And you mentioned that there's a shortage, but aren't there cycles in the real estate industry? Aren't there surpluses, shortages? It goes up and down. It's supply demand, and it's just a natural part of the real estate market that sometimes there's too much housing and sometimes too little housing.
I would agree on parts of that. There is the low-income housing and the income-eligible housing probably doesn't cycle like some of the others. I mean, these are the Turkey Valley, the Schwans, the line assembly people that if the government doesn't get involved, there's not housing for them. It's a different argument. We talk about helping business grow. In this case, I mean, we've read article upon article that basically say subsidized housing in Greater Minnesota, it's not going to get built. It just will not get built for the reasons I talked about. I mean, you wouldn't build it. If you need to get 800 to make money, you have to rent it for 200, you would not build it as a private party. And that's what we're faced with. And in this case, we really tried to find ways to offset that $2 million of the city not spending the money. I mean, we could do he would probably take the deal without TIF. If we put the streets in, we put the parking in, we put the water in, we put the street lights in, we put the sidewalks in, and then we'll spend $3 million. I mean, so, which we would do for any private development. So in this case, there's a couple different scenarios I think you got to look at.
We're not talking about housing for the poor. I mean, this is upper.
No, this is $25,000 to $20,000 household income.
On 20% of the units.
Yeah, on 24% of it, yeah. So 80% is not income.
Right.
And so that, it's not like all of it's subsidized housing. And the question I have is, so that's 20%. Do you allocate certain apartments and say those can only be low income? How do you enforce a 20% rule?
It's a percentage. It just is you could actually end up if they happen to all rent at the same, you could have all 20 units in one building be income subsidized, depending how people move in and move out. More than likely, as they fill one building, it would be 20% of the first building, 20% of the second building, and then maybe some people would move out that were paying full rent that you could, you'd get it to this area. But they have to, by law, in order to be TIF eligible, they have to have 20% of them be income eligible.
So they do allocate it, so if some people apply, if we don't meet our quota, then you're not going to get the apartment unless you're low income.
Some developers identify, like, this 3-bedroom is subsidized, this 2-bedroom is subsidized, and other developers say, as long as I maintain at least 20% across the whole housing project, then that fulfills the requirements as well.
And so what's happening here is that 20% of those apartments are going to low income people, and they're really getting very nice apartments, stainless steel appliances. Whereas if they go down the street to another subsidized housing, they're not going to get those stainless steel appliances.
Yeah, and I'll make a quick comment on that, and I don't mean anything by this, but we have the same kind of situation in those type of apartments as we have in the hotel industry. We have a lot of rooms or a lot of apartments in the hotel industry, a lot of rooms. They're 30 and 40 years old, some of those, what we would consider income eligible apartments, and people are choosing that they can't live in them. And that's a shame, but that's where we're at today in Marshall, because there's a percentage of our low income type housing or apartments that have fulfilled their lifespan and they're not putting money into them. And certain class of people decided we're not living in those, we just can't, we're not going to do it. Is this one maybe a little extreme with stainless steel appliance? Yeah, I mean, you could argue that, but I would argue that some of the people living in that maybe deserve that as well. I mean, there's different types of income eligible people. Some fell on hard times. They're just in between times. Husband, wife lost jobs. Could have been a death in the family. I mean, I would not say they don't deserve some of that stuff.
And I think in the last couple of years, we've lost some apartment complexes that were low. I believe J&J no longer is, they went all market-based rate, which is 130-some units that we lost out of that, too.
One last question, though. In real estate, it's location, location, location. So everyone feels like this is a good location for that type of apartment. I mean, to the east, don't you have businesses and stuff, or?
It would be to the east, there'd be some light industrial, some business.
Right.
And then to the west, it would be R1.
Right.
The potential customer that they're looking at would be majority would work within a half mile. And this was really, if you could have waved a magic wand, this location really worked perfect. We've had a couple others look at that for the same exact reason. A lot of people work at Schwann's, a lot of people work at Turkey Valley, and those are actually almost within walking. Turkey Valley is walking distance, and Schwann's would even be debatable.
Other discussion on the motion? Steve?
One quick thing. I kind of agree with Councilman Bearcolder that government seems to be doing everything, and I appreciated, Cal, that they're not available. But in that standpoint, or from that viewpoint, I would think that if the employers got hard up enough to need more employees because they can't house them, that they would buy the housing, and there are places that do that. So that's just
and they're actually they are working with some local developers, like not buying the housing but guaranteeing the rent.
Right.
Some of those types of things.
Right. So they subsidize their own as part of the benefits of having the employees. So
one of the biggest things that Greater Minnesota struggles with is prevailing rents are low, and so as prevailing rents go, they don't increase fast enough as building costs and
Right.
All of that. So Greater Minnesota is upside down, and so I've been a real estate agent and whatever for 5 years or more, and you hope that the market turns around, but it hasn't. Not for multifamily housing such as this. I wish it would, but.
Other discussion on the motion?
Call the question.
If there's no other discussion, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 21. Agenda item number 21, consider the approval of consumption and display license for Southwest Minnesota State University. Any questions?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 22. Consider the authorization for the approval of significant user agreement for the wastewater discharge permit between the City of Marshall and Schwann Food Company Global Supply Chain, Inc. Bob Van Moore, wastewater superintendent.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a document that we have with all our larger industrial users. Basically, we're required by the state to assure that we don't go over our treatment plant capacity. So by doing the larger users, we set limits on them, monthly loading limits that we can handle and assure that we can stay within our permit limits. What happened in the past, this is 2001, I actually put these user agreements together, basically looking at what current loadings were from a lot of the industries and kind of divvied up what the residential commercial loads were versus industrial loads. And I set limits on all the industries, and most of the other ones, we've got a total of 3 significant industrial users in town. The other 2 are ADM and Schwann's Foods. Schwann's Foods was at the time producing a lot more. They had very high loads. They didn't have as good of a pretreatment system in, so their loads were pretty heavy back then. This has been, I went back about the last 9 years, and they haven't even come close to the capacity that we had allotted for them. So looking for future capacity, if there was ever another industry that wanted to come to town, we're basically capped out with allocated loads for the treatment plant capacity. So we started talking with Schwann's, and they were agreeing to it that their current loads are 4,500 pounds of BOD. We asked them if they could reduce down to 2,500 pounds of BOD. That leaves us with an extra 2,000 pounds available for somebody else. Same with the total suspended solids. They were allotted 1,200 pounds. We want to reduce it down to 600. This is still a comfortable level for what they're producing right now. They have the capabilities to add on to pretreatment if they would do a big expansion or something like that. So anybody that would come into town that would be a large sewer user, we'd be asking them probably to have an agreement, and we would have to see what we have allotted for loads and adjust to that. So this does, it's a good move for us. It does allow available capacity if somebody else is interested in coming to town. So Schwann's are okay with it. The agreement, we went over it with the city attorney and did some minor tweaking of verbiage and stuff like that, but really the only changes to the document, the large changes were on page 2 is the BOD loading and the TSS loading. That's reduced. Otherwise, most of it is pretty boilerplate to actually the other 2 industries also. So.
Thank you, Bob. Questions for Bob?
Question.
David?
Bob, I'm assuming we don't have to deal with the state of Minnesota on this, MPCA?
No. It's a requirement from them that we control our industrial users by this means. So
The details are up to us.
Yep. And we do, I have an annual pretreatment report or industrial user report I have to submit to MPCA, and they review all the loadings and stuff like that. So it will be a document change for them, and that I will notify them.
Any other questions?
So this is renewed on an annual basis automatically on January 1st then of each year?
Automatically, yes.
And so if we don't want to renew it, how much notification do we have to give them?
I don't see any reason why we would ever not renew it. It may come to the point where we would have to renegotiate and look at things if they would want to do a large expansion. They kind of know what their allotments are. They would have to do something in-house to kind of control those loads. So the bearing falls kind of on them.
It'd be pretty hard for the city to shut off any utility user short of them doing substantially illegal actions, because under the Federal Clean Water Act, we're responsible to ensure that there's adequate wastewater collection and treatment within our city limits.
I think the biggest thing that we've got here is we've been looking at a reduction of their allocation for the last 5 years minimum, and what we were concerned about was making those allocations available for potential other users, making sure that we protected our existing users as well. So with their consent and agreement, I think this is a good way to free up some loading.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Bob. You have the recommendation. I'd entertain a motion.
Also move.
Motion by John, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 23. Consider the Minnesota Facilities Authority loan application. Once again, Bob.
Okay, this is with the large project we're designing right now. We've consulted with Bolton and Mink Engineering to do the design of the project and also help us secure funding. We're looking at the low interest loan application from basically the state, and these documents here are requirements of the loan application. There's a resolution that we would follow some of the regulations for qualifying for the loans, and you'll see on the resolution it's asking for $17,662,000. That was a number that came from our facility plan. Back when we were looking at potential nitrogen limits also. So there was 2 phases to the facility plan. First phase was what we're in the process of designing right now, and that's basically rehabbing the existing treatment plant. That qualifies for the low interest loan. The second portion was for expanding out and doing nitrogen removal. We don't have the nitrogen removal limit on us yet, so we're going to hold off on phase 2 until we're forced to do that. So even though the resolution says amount of $17 million, we will adjust that once we get our project completely designed and bid. The estimate at that is like $9.5 million. So common practice to ask for the maximum amount and then reduce down from there.
Questions for Bob?
You said there's low interest on this loan, but there are strings attached, all kinds of strings attached to this loan, federal requirements, whatever. And do we know approximately what interest rate we're going to get off of this loan? And how does it compare to other city financing rates?
We don't know exactly what the rates will be. We don't have to accept these either. So we do still have the option of doing a GO bond or anything like that if we found out that was more competitive. Yeah, there are federal regulations that we follow, so there are some expenses and extra expenses with the low interest loan, but they're typically in the last few years have been in the 1.75 range. So they're pretty substantially lower than I think we can get a GO bond for, but we still have that alternative to look and compare. We're not binding into anything by applying for this loan.
The reason I bring this up is that we've talked about this before on the City Council, that there's prevailing wage laws in here, that when they do the construction they have to pay prevailing wages. And we were told that certain businesses weren't interested in low-income loan or low-interest rate loans because they lost more on the prevailing wage than they gained on the lower interest rate. And so that would be a concern I have here is, we're adding to the construction cost by having to pay prevailing wages. There's a provision here about a fair share statement where a fair share objective is a percentage of 5% for women business enterprises and a 3.5% for minority business enterprises. I guess I'm not all that familiar with that type of provision. I know there are provisions like that, but does that say we make a good faith effort to do it, or does that mean that we need to come up with those percentages?
I believe it's a good faith estimate. We're going to take bids on it, and we'll do that accordingly. So,
thank you.
And we are using Bolton and Mink, and that will be a large part of this is when we get this down. What is the advantages and disadvantages of the low interest loan? So,
well, it's worth exploring.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other question for Bob? If not, I would entertain a motion on this application. Motion by David, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 24. Commission Board Liaison reports from, given the lateness of the meeting, I'll keep mine very short. The Regional Development Commission met last Thursday, the full commission. One of their items was the resolution of support for the Highway 23 corridors of commerce projects, as well as that we discussed earlier, and there was also a report from recent loan activity from the revolving loan fund that I chair. Craig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll do the same, keep it short. The library board met yesterday afternoon. Appreciate the meetings on the Saratoga Street construction and the cooperation kind of working with trafficking and things like that. And we talked a lot about, kind of where we're at and looked at the budget, and things continue to improve there. I think we're getting a better handle on our energy costs. The Bisbee was out and did some more change outs on filters, and so they're really getting the thing moving. The library's working well. They're bringing on another part-time staffer for about 14, 15 hours a week, and some of the savings we're making in energy, we're able to actually pick up and increase the services at the library. Got a lot of collection numbers. A lot of libraries are kind of seeing things drop off. We're seeing things continuing to increase. The Plum Creek agreement has moved forward. We're actually signed on that, and I think everybody else pretty much has. Some of them, I think we're still waiting for some of the other library boards that are only meet quarterly, but Lyon County and Marshall are completely signed off on that, so that's kind of nice to have the Plum Creek thing into place. And just a reminder to everybody, the Foundation book sale, our Friends book sale is going on now, so if you are shopping for books, go out there. That whole Minnesota, that meeting, the main room that we use is stacked full, so go out and get some good buys on books. Southwest Amateur Sports Commission met at noon today. Based off of the retreat that was in December, we're moving forward with kind of the visioning and broke out into two different groups. One is media and marketing, and the other one is facility and funding. So we're getting that focus now on moving forward. There's a number of events coming up. If you look, check the calendar, there's the the Marshall Radio home show and outdoor show coming up weekend after this coming. And then the 13th, 14th, and 15th of April, they're having a RV and outdoor rec, and I can't think of what else they're calling it, but it's going to be a camper show and ATVs and other things out there. So that's another good one coming up. I think this coming weekend is the figure skating is coming up, and then the ice comes out. So things are moving really quickly out there. I think they're booked up until the month of July, come summer, and then we're kind of into the summer months. But that's when we're into the ball fields and all the outdoor things. But one of the things is a recent tournament. There was just the concession stand sold out. The numbers coming back from Maha on the concession piece has been very successful. So that was a really good move. We're going to get some numbers together about how many people have actually been through there for events and used it, but we're probably in that 80,000 range for numbers. It's been phenomenal. So I think that talking to the CVB folks, working on booking up the camping show in April, they've gotten a lot of really good response on that, and people are excited about it. It's a pretty top shelf facility. Listening to the people at these most recent tournaments, and the feedback on that is everybody is just really positive about the facility, the experience. I think our people that are involved in it are pretty satisfied too. So that's something we can be proud of, and I know that the commission is working hard now to keep us moving forward and to keep building on that, and to develop the goals and objectives that we have for that. So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you for that brief report, Craig.
Just for the record, by my standards, that was brief.
Mine will be brief. Community Services Advisory Board did not meet. Cable Commission did meet, but I was working during the time. And EDA met after a couple of shifts around because of lack of quorum, and I was out on a conference at that time too. So, and with that, Your Honor, may I be dismissed to go to my daughter's?
Certainly, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Fine.
Planning Commission meets tomorrow. Public Housing Commission met yesterday. We had an open public meeting on CFP, which is Capital Fund Program Annual and 5-Year Plan. We had one person in attendance for that meeting, the public meeting. The Commission approved the CFP 2018 Annual Statement, the CFP 5-Year Plan, the PHA 5-Year and Annual Plan. They reviewed and awarded lawn bids, and they approved the 2017 financial statements. One of the things that they're looking for as far as the Commission is, right now there's a private company that provides washer and dryers for the different apartment units, and that business wants to get out of that business and is interested in selling those appliances to the Public Housing Commission, and then the Public Housing Commission would maintain those appliances and then collect the revenue from it, and hopefully make a little profit on it that they could use for other operations at the Public Housing Commission. But that's something they're looking at, and no final decisions have been made.
Okay. John?
As said, the EDA did meet, and we took action on most of their activities. I wasn't able to be at the meeting, but just following up on the minutes and discussions is predominantly the apartments. The utilities did not meet.
David?
Airport Commission did not meet. Convention and Visitors Bureau meets Thursday of this week. With your license, I'll lump a couple of things together here. Last Thursday, I took a tour with the Engen and Associates Architect and a couple of other members of this board of the several prospective sites for a city hall. Also attended the meeting, public informational meeting about the Marguerite South Bend project. Friday attended a meeting, luncheon in Cold Spring with the Highway 23 group that I mentioned earlier. Congressman Emmer and Peterson spoke there. And then this very evening I leave for St. Paul for the lobby day tomorrow for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and Mayor Burns will be there as well. And I've got a speech presentation to go. With your leave, I'll do just that. Thank you.
Jim?
Transportation meets tomorrow. The Adult Community Center has not met. And since we still have a quorum, I have the same concert to get to that Dr. Meister's at, which starts at 8 o'clock. So if I may be excused too.
Very good. And we will still have a quorum, so that's a good thing. We'll move then to agenda item number 25, which is councilmember individual items. Oh, Craig, let's start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only thing I have is I want to commend our Public Works and Parks and City staff for the response to the recent snowstorm. It's one of those that I think we all hate to get, heart attack snow, and I don't know how it worked for them, but I know it took me 5 times as long to do what I had to do, and I paid a price for that. I've never shoved so much gas through my snow removal equipment in a full season, much less in one storm. So I just want to talk about what I think a great job that our staff did at going after it. And I know they're still working on it because it's one of those snows that keeps on giving. So thank you.
Glenn?
Related to that, I did hear some concerns from people in the west part of the community where it was kind of mushy streets, and then it got really cold, and it was really bumping driving down those streets, and they're concerned about how much of the ice was left on the streets. It was, like I said, they felt it was very difficult driving through all those ruts. So I don't know if that's something we can do to improve or what, but that's a concern they had.
I know on that note, and Glenn, you'll probably comment on that later also, but I know they did come back like the next day or the day after, and to take care of some of those areas that were tough. So. Glenn?
The only other thing I would mention here is that I noticed in the agenda there were 5 revised items, and it would be nice if we can kind of keep the number of revised items to a minimum. I know there's always some last-minute changes, but it would be good if people could get their agenda items in early enough that we wouldn't have to have all these revisions. Thank you.
John?
I'm trying to think of something good that we could railroad through it, just 4 of us rather than 7, but I can't, so that's it.
Okay, then we'll move to agenda item number 26. Staff reports, starting with City Administrator Sharon Hansen.
In the essence of time, I do not have a report this meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Glenn?
Just a couple of items with the chief here as well. I think the process that we use for a snow emergency is one that we don't use very often. So it was done kind of in accordance with the street department and the police department and public works. So when we declared it, they kind of knew what they were doing. So I was just wondering, and Councilmember Lozinski was too, how many tickets and tows did we have on that event? We looked up our last snow emergency declaration, and we had one from 2009 that we don't think we ever published because it was still redlined in our books. So it's been a long time.
Yes, and again, our emphasis is to try and get voluntary compliance. So we had staff out Tuesday morning trying to get cars moved, but we ended up, there were 8 tickets issued and none towed. Now there would have been about 5 that would have been towed, but they were basically encased in ice, and it just wasn't practical to move them. This also ended up being the SMSU mid-break term, and we're assuming that they were all students, and so I'm meeting with the university on other stuff later this week, but one of the things, just do a reminder, and the 2 issues you deal with is it's different students, and we, as Glenn said, it's been 10 years since we've had that, but the cars were just encased, and it just couldn't had them towed without a likelihood for damage. And we did, if cars were being dug out but encrusted, I do think that some drivers got a lesson learned on moving their vehicles right away by having to dig them out. It was Craig said, it was a major project to deal with the snow, so they really had to work to dig those out. So I sort of think that was a little bit of a lesson, better than a citation would have been. So we did 8 and no tows.
We really do appreciate the cooperation and participation that the PD has with that process. Also, for Alex Peterson and the procedures that we use to put it on social media, we didn't have social media 10 years ago. And so we had the notice in the paper, and we had the notice on the radios, and we had the notice at the university, and maybe a little notice through the school system. But other than that, we had a lot of issues with ticketing and towing before. And this is working, I think, way better, where the word did get out way better than we used to do it. So
we had really good voluntary compliance. Like you said, we worked to reinforce that, but the public really got on top of it themselves.
Not that there weren't issues, but
right.
they were issues like we'd all have in an event like that.
I know one thing you may want to comment on, Glenn. There is a number of comments on Facebook about snow gates on road graders, and at least City of Sioux Falls has that. And of course, the practicality of it with this snow would not have worked because of the volume and the moisture content, and you simply couldn't, the gate wouldn't accommodate that. But the other practicality is that the way that we do it with a road grader and a wing on it, you wouldn't have the wing, so you'd end up being less efficient. You have to have the road grader make the last pass, so you'd have to either have multiple pieces of equipment making that first pass and then the road grader make the last pass.
We had snow gates in Devil's Lake where I worked, and they worked for the first part of the season with 2 inches of snow, and you can carry that through the driveways, for instance. It works real well if you have, and then it'll work the next time until you get a boulevard cover of more than a foot, higher than the blade itself, and then they're not good anymore. So we always had to take them off after we got any snow. This one, you'd have taken them off before we started anyway.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, and I heard a lot of those the same comments and concerns, and I understand that, and I understand the frustration. But I also know that, in talking to a number of the city staff, it took them at least 4 or 5 times as long to do the same work. Mm-hmm. So when the concept is to go down every street and get them opened up, you get them opened up as quick as you can. Unfortunately, most of our people have the capability of driving before those streets are opened. With the amount of moisture in the snow and as cold as it was, as soon as you drive on it, it's ice. And anybody that's ever ran a snowplow or a motor grader moving snow knows that once it's driven on, you're not cutting it down to the pavement until it warms up. Mm-hmm. So was it ruddy and rough? Absolutely. My driveway still is. And I do a pretty good job of moving my snow. But I live with it and we walk very carefully. I drove Tuesday night from here to Mankato and south, and all the way to basically to Wabasso was terrible. And it was terrible for 2 days. My daughter lives in Vesta. It was terrible. That's welcome to Minnesota. I feel bad about it. I still want to say that I think our staff did a great job. Was it terrible? Yeah, I'm thankful we don't get these snows in the first week in December instead of the first week in March. Because I remember years that we fought this for the whole winter, because moving that and making everybody happy and getting all the streets clear is almost impossible unless we dump them full of salt. And I don't think anybody wants that either. So I appreciate the people's concerns, but I also appreciate how difficult it is to do the job and make everybody happy, and I want to thank our staff.
And I'll do a quick comment on the legislative issues. We do have some that are fairly significant that you could comment if you go down tomorrow. One, of course, is transportation funding. Another one, kind of on the side, is a bill to require release of retainage of construction projects when substantial completion is complete. Well, if you recall, and even today, we have some projects out there that are certainly substantially complete where subcontractors or suppliers haven't been paid for their work. So we will hold some money for those kinds of things to get the contractors to pay their bills. Now, there are other alternatives to that, bonds, guarantees. Good luck with going to court with those. So I think it's important maybe if you hear about that when you go down or talk about it, release of retainage on substantial completion, I would not recommend we support. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Should have introduced you at the start of the meeting.
Mayor, Council, I'll be brief. Dennis Simpson is obviously conspicuous in his absence at tonight's meeting. He will be in attendance next week. I thought I'd introduce myself. My name is Matthew Gross. I'm an attorney at Cornstrom & Doring Law Firm. I work with Dennis. I've recognized some of the faces. I've attended some meetings previously. I work as a city attorney for several cities in the area, in addition to maintaining a civil litigation practice. But in addition, I also serve as the prosecutor for the city marshal. I recognize Rob, and as you heard and saw tonight, the officers at the police department do a tremendous job, and also the leadership at the police department. So I want to commend them. That's obviously an example of what they do, so they really need to be commended in their work and services. Thought I'd introduce myself. I may run into you in the future or at future meetings, so it's always a pleasure to be working for an active city as a city marshal.
Well, thank you and welcome. We'll move then to agenda item number 29, which is the pending agenda items. Any questions about the pending agenda items? If not, agenda item number 30 is the information items, including the building permits. Agenda item number 31, upcoming meetings, which then brings us to agenda item number 32 to consider adjourning this meeting.
Move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John to adjourn. Discussion. If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you.